Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Anna Imraman. For today's videos, I will discuss to you about limits. Limits suggest a boundary that may be reached or not, or possibly exceeded. Limit a of sub n is equal to L. The limit of a sub n is equal to L as n increases without bounded is L. Basic limits. We have two basic limits. So first we have limit raised to 1 is equal to 0, which are n is approaches to infinity. Second, we have limit n is equal to infinity, which are n is approaches to infinity. So properties of limits. So if limit n is equal to a when our n is approaches to a, so limit b sub n is equal to b when our n is approaches to 8 and c is a constant. So limit c is equal to c where n is approaches to infinity. The second is limit c times e sub n is equal to c, and limit a sub n is equal to c times a sub n, which when our n is approaches to 8. Number 3, limit the quantity of a sub n plus b sub n is equal to limit a sub n plus limit b sub n is equal to a plus b when our n is approaches to infinity. 4, limit the quantity of a sub n times b sub n is equal to the quantity of limit a sub n times limit the quantity of limit b sub n is equal to a times b. 5, limit a sub n over b sub n when our n is approaches to 8 is equal to limit a sub n over limit b sub n is equal to a over b, where our b is not equal to 0. For example, limit the quantity of n plus 6 when our n is approaches to 8. So limit a sub n plus limit 6 and approaches to infinity. So we have infinity plus 6 is equal to infinity. Second, limit 4n plus 1 over n when our n approaches to infinity is equal to limit 4n over n plus 1 over n is equal to limit approaches to n approaches to infinity, the quantity of 4 plus over n then is equal to limit 4 plus limit 1 over n when our n is approaches to infinity. So 4 plus 0 is equal to 4. So limit of functions. First, limit c is equal to c when our x is approaches to a. The limit of a constant is a constant. Second, limit x raised to n is equal to a raised to n when our x is approaches to a. 3, limit c f of x is equal to c limit x when our n is approaches to a. Limit f of x positive and negative g of x is equal to f of x plus limit g of x when our x is approaches to a. Last, limit f of x times g of x is equal to limit f of x times limit g of x when our x is approaches to a. So we have the basic limits. So limit the quantity of 1 over n is equal to 0 when our n is approaches to a, infinity. Second, limit n is equal to infinity when our n is approaches to infinity. So properties of limits. If limit a sub n is equal to a and limit b sub n is equal to b and c when our n is approaches to infinity. So first, we have limit c is equal to c when our n is approaches to infinity. Limit c a sub n is equal to c, or limit a sub n is equal to c when our n is approaches to infinity. lemma the quantity of a sub n plus b sub n is equal to lemma a sub n plus b sub n when our n is approaches to infinity is equal to a plus b. Lemma the quantity of a sub n times b sub n is equal to limit a sub n times limit b sub n when our n is approaches to infinity is equal to a times b. Limit a sub n over b sub n is equal to limit a sub n over limit b sub n when our n is approaches to infinity is equal to a over b provided that b is not equal to 0. Evaluate the following. So we have limit n plus 4 when our n is approaches to infinity is equal to limit n plus limit 4 when our n is approaches to infinity. So we have infinity plus 4 is equal to infinity. Second, limit 3n plus 1 over n when our n is approaches to infinity. So you need to distribute. So we have limit 3n over n plus 1 over n when our n is approaches to infinity. So we have 3 plus 1 over n is equal to limit 3 plus limit 1 over n when our n is approaches to infinity. So we have 3 plus 0 is equal to 0.